Hello everybody, this is Corbin Whittington with ScienceTime, and today we are talking about time travel. So the first thing to know about time travel is how it works and why we can't go into the past. Basically, all you guys need to know for this episode is how time travel works and why we can't go into the past with it. So with time travel, all you really need is to go really, really fast, nearly the speed of light. And in order to do this, you have to have a lot of energy, which is why we're not really able to time travel right now, but it's besides the point. Now, why do we have to go really fast in order to travel into the future? I touched upon this in Einstein's general relativity in both of my prior videos. Basically, massive objects distort the space-time continuum. So if you distort space-time with a large amount of energy, which is basically you going almost the speed of light, essentially you're warping reality itself, and your version of reality is different from other person's versions of reality. Now, the reason why we can't go back in time is mostly because it violates a lot of the laws of physics, and that's pretty bad, but the worst thing about it is it creates paradoxes if we only have one timeline. And that is very bad. You might be familiar with the grandfather paradox. If you killed your grandfather, then how would you be born? AKA, you couldn't go back in time. Whatever. Anyways, how can you travel forward in time? If you went 90% the speed of light, 10 minutes for you would be 20 minutes on Earth. So it's all relative. Essentially, what you're doing is your perception of time is changed. If you went the speed of light, however, you'd be turned into energy due to having infinite mass. To outside observers, you'd have infinite mass. Except to your own self, you'd be turning into energy. And using E equals mc squared, you would turn into a lot of energy. Essentially, your entire body would construct itself to be one singular point, and everything around you would fade away. A little bit terrifying. Now we'll be talking about some popular sci-fi movies and shows. For example, Mr. Peabody and Sherman, Interstellar, Back to the Future, and Ender's Game. Now, I'm first going to talk about Interstellar. Interstellar features a scene where they're on a planet where every 7 seconds a day on Earth passes. This is actually quite a good example because the planet that they're on is close to a black hole, which distorts space and time greatly, to the point where this is possible, where their perception of time is just this: 7 seconds is equal to a day on Earth. This is really impressive because I think they actually did the math for that one. The next example I have is Ender's Game. Now, in the book, they feature something that essentially goes like this. They're traveling close to the speed of light, so their perception of time is really fast compared to Earth's. So, go back to the old example of 10 minutes here is equal to 20 minutes on Earth. Yeah, you get the point. And then the next two examples I have are of bad time travel paradoxes: Back to the Future and Mr. Peabody and Sherman. Now, if you've watched either of these, you should know what I'm talking about. In Mr. Peabody and Sherman, we assume that there's one timeline because they can teleport into their actual future reality. Now, because of this, what ends up happening is Mr. Peabody should have completely altered the past and nothing would have stayed the same. I mean, unless he did it with very precise things, but I doubt that he did. In Back to the Future, that's exactly where that whole grandfather paradox comes in. I mean, it's even featured inside of the movie where Marty doesn't kill his own grandfather, but he makes it so that way his parents never, got together. And this is a really dangerous thing with traveling back in the past, and if it was possible and we did have one timeline, then yeah, this could 100% happen. All right, but what if you could go back in time with absolutely no paradoxes, no real consequences for the future? You only have to worry about yourself and you can do basically whatever you want. The first thing that you'd have to worry about is all the diseases that you'd bring. with COVID-19 happening, that I don't think that'd be very good for any time that you go to. I mean, even if you went back to the 1950s, yeesh. But let's say that you go back to the era of 1200. You would probably kill the entire population. I mean, our immune systems nowadays are so evolved that you carry so many viruses in your body that if you were to be around anyone, you'd probably kill them. You also would have to learn their old ancient language, which a lot of those have been lost. That would be a real pain, especially if you only speak English or any one of the major languages that we use nowadays. And language actually changes fairly quickly. I mean, a few years ago, we were using different slang than we are now. But one thing that could be cool is if you knew what was going to happen. For example, a solar eclipse, you might be revered as a god if you went back in time, pretty far back in time. Let's say, for example, you went back to the year 800 and you say, today the sun will go out, and I know with 100% certainty when the days will go out. Everyone would probably start worshiping you if you said that it was you. That'd be pretty cool. But then you also may be killed because, back in those ancient times, I'm not quite sure everybody was looking for a all-powerful deity. Who knows? Some other things that you might come into contact with is if you go into Europe during the bubonic plague era and you don't have any vaccines for it, you would probably be one of the casualties, which is pretty bad, especially considering if you die in the past, that means that everything that you have done up to this point is all for null, and if you were to go back in the past, that means that that'd create a paradox if you died in the past. Another thing that people forget about is if you went too far back in time, you wouldn't find any clean water or cleanliness anywhere. The food would be awful. The culture would be terrible because back in that time, monarchies were a thing, and you'd probably be a peasant, honestly. I mean, if you're from royal blood, good for you, but that doesn't mean anything because there's no blood test back then. There's a lot of things that time travel just doesn't touch upon that would really suck. I mean, imagine salt. There's a whole war over salt. And, nowadays we kind of just take it for granted. Anyways, the next thing that I'm going to talk about is let's go into the United States of America. Now, this is a really touchy subject, but this is true for our past. In the United States past, if you were anything other than a white male, you'd be oppressed very harshly. I mean, back then, women didn't have rights, minorities didn't have rights. You would probably have a really hard time getting people to believe you that you were a time traveler. You might even be killed. Who knows? Back in those times. But let's say, for example, you're a woman going back to, pre-industrial revolution America, or I guess pilgrimage America. They'd probably think you're a witch with the language that you're speaking, and you might get drowned, which that doesn't sound like a very fun time, honestly. But even more than that, imagine that you're a minority and you're educated to the point where you can read and you can speak fluently. Back then, that would have been basically a crime, if not punishable by death. I mean, education was a thing revered only for whites. It's crazy. But now, what if you went into the future? This is also something that people don't really think about. The same concept would apply with disease. Even though your immune system is strong, in the future, more harmful diseases will come out. I mean, in the past few years where we've had MRSA, and that was due to an influx of antibiotics with people using them, creating a super virus. So what makes people think that in the future there won't be more super viruses? Exactly like COVID, for example. I mean, this is a very strong virus, and in the future, who knows, it might become even stronger. Not COVID specifically, but just viruses in general. Your immune system couldn't really handle that, and if you're trying to speak the language, good luck. Traveling forward in time means that everything has to be relatively the same for you, or you'd have to get vaccines immediately. Now, maybe that would be not too hard in the future, but who knows? The world might be in ruins even if, you do it for a few years. Let's say that you're going 90% the speed of light. Twice as fast is your perception of time on Earth, right? Let's say you stand there for 10 years. That means that 20 years have passed. What has happened in the past 20 years? That's a lot of stuff. You might even have to get used to a new America, a new world, and maybe even a new political system. Who knows what will have changed? Maybe we'll have interstellar travel by then. Maybe we'll figure out the mystery to the universe and how gravity works. I doubt it, but it's a good thing to hope for, especially in that short of a time frame. Anyways, this is going to be a relatively short episode, but this has been Science Time. Thank you all for tuning in. Have a wonderful week.